The scent of antiseptic and fear hung heavy in the sterile hospital corridor as I gripped Sienna's medical chart with trembling fingers. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with an almost mocking cheerfulness, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor that had become as familiar to me as my own apartment over the past 3 months. Each step echoed with the weight of desperation I'd been carrying since Dr. Martinez first spoke those terrifying words. Rare genetic disorder. Experimental treatment. Bone marrow transplant. My 5-year-old daughter lay in room 314, her once vibrant auburn curls now dulled by illness, her bright green eyes, so much like mine, growing dimmer with each passing day. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd found ourselves here, in St. Mary's Medical Center, the very hospital where I'd brought her into this world 6 years ago, alone and terrified, with nothing but a fierce determination to protect her from the dangerous world I'd fled. "Miss Collins?" The voice belonged to Dr. Martinez, her expression carefully neutral as she approached. I'd learned to read the subtle variations in her professional mask. Today, something was different. There was an urgency in her stride that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "Is it the test results?" I asked, though part of me already knew. We'd been waiting for the bone marrow registry to find a match for 3 agonizing weeks. Each day that passed was another day stolen from my daughter's chances. Dr. Martinez gestured toward her office, and I followed on unsteady legs. The small space was cramped with medical journals and family photos, reminders of the normal lives other people got to live. I perched on the edge of the chair, my hands instinctively moving to smooth down my worn jeans, a nervous habit I'd developed during the countless medical appointments that had become our new reality. "We found a match," she said, without preamble, and for a moment, my heart soared with relief so intense it nearly knocked me breathless. Then I saw her expression. "However, there are complications." The relief curdled into something cold and sharp in my chest. "What kind of complications?" "The donor is listed in our system under a private registry. High-profile individuals often use this service for confidentiality." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The donor has agreed to help, but he's requested a meeting first. He wants to understand the full situation before proceeding." Ice filled my veins. In my desperate search for help, I'd submitted Sienna's information to every bone marrow registry I could find, including the exclusive private ones that catered to wealthy families. I'd never imagined we'd actually get a match from that world, the world I'd spent 6 years running from. "What's his name?" The question escaped before I could stop it, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Martinez consulted her notes. "Sebastian Russo. He's listed as a philanthropist and businessman. Very generous with medical causes, apparently." She looked up at me with concern. "Sam, you look like you've seen a ghost." Sebastian Russo. The name hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I was 22 again, standing in the rain outside his penthouse, my heart breaking as I made the hardest decision of my life. The memories I'd fought so hard to bury came rushing back. His hands on my skin, his voice whispering promises in the dark. The moment I'd discovered exactly who and what he really was. "I need to think about this," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Sam, I need to be direct with you." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression grave. "Sienna's condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Without this transplant, we're looking at weeks, not months. This donor could be our only chance." "Weeks." The word echoed in my mind as I made my way back to Sienna's room, my legs moving on autopilot while my thoughts spiraled. How had he found us? Was this some cosmic joke, or had he been searching for me all these years? And did it matter when my daughter's life hung in the balance? Sienna was awake when I entered, her small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. Despite everything, she managed to smile when she saw me, the same radiant smile that had gotten us through countless hardships over the years. "Mommy, you look sad," she observed with the startling perceptiveness that had always set her apart from other children. "Did the doctor have bad news?" I sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the IV line, and smoothed her hair back from her forehead. Her skin felt paper-thin and burning hot, despite the fever medication. "Actually, sweetheart, she might have good news. The doctors think they found someone who can help make you better." Her eyes lit up with hope so pure it nearly broke me. "Really? When can they help me?" "Soon, baby. Very soon." I hoped I wasn't lying. That night, after Sienna had drifted off to sleep with the help of pain medication, I sat in the uncomfortable bedside chair and tried to process the impossible situation I found myself in. 6 years ago, I'd fled from Sebastian Russo and the violent world he inhabited, choosing to raise our daughter alone rather than subject her to that darkness. Now, that same man might be the only thing standing between her and death. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Scarlett. "Any news from the doctors today?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "They found a donor. It's complicated." Her reply came immediately. "Complicated how? Sam, what aren't you telling me?" Scarlett had been my lifeline through all of this, helping with medical bills she couldn't afford, and taking time off from her own job to sit with Sienna when I needed to work. She deserved to know the truth. But how could I explain that the donor was the father of my child? A man I'd never told her about, whose name I'd never spoken aloud. Before I could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Sam, Mr. Russo is here. He'd like to meet with you." My heart stopped. "He's here? Now?" He flew in as soon as he received word about the match. "He's in conference room B if you're ready." I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. But Sienna stirred in her sleep, making a small sound of discomfort, and the decision was made for me. I kissed her forehead gently and followed Dr. Martinez down the corridor, each step carrying me closer to a confrontation I'd spent 6 years dreading. Conference room B was small and institutional, with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everything look washed out and surreal. And there, sitting at the oval table with his back to the door, was Sebastian Russo. Even from behind, I would have recognized the set of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled just slightly at the nape of his neck, the expensive tailoring of his charcoal suit. He turned when he heard us enter, and our eyes met across the sterile space. 6 years melted away in an instant, and I was looking into the same stormy gray eyes that had haunted my dreams and nightmares in equal measure. He was older now, lines of stress and power etched around those eyes, his face leaner and harder than I remembered. But he was unmistakably the man I'd loved and feared in equal measure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us crackled with unresolved history, 6 years of secrets and silence hanging heavy in the small room. "Doctor." Martinez cleared her throat uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. "Mr. Russo, this is Sienna's mother, Samantha Collins. Sam, this is Sebastian Russo, our potential donor." Sebastian's eyes never left mine as he stood slowly, his movements controlled and predatory in a way that sent familiar shivers down my spine. "Hello, Samantha," he said quietly, his voice exactly as I remembered, deep and rich, with just a hint of an accent that spoke of old money and older dangers. "Sebastian." His name felt foreign on my tongue after so many years of refusing to speak it. Dr. Martinez looked between us, her confusion evident. "Have you two met before?" "You could say that," Sebastian replied, his gaze still locked on mine. "We have some history to discuss." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Dr. Martinez shifted uncomfortably before clearing her throat again. "I'll leave you two to talk. Mr. Russo, You have my contact information if you have any medical questions." She hesitated at the door. "Sam, I'll be in my office if you need anything." The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Sebastian remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture I remembered all too well, controlled power barely held in check. The expensive fabric of his suit couldn't hide the lean muscle beneath, and despite everything, despite the years and the fear and the pain, my body responded to his presence with a traitorous flutter of recognition. "6 years," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. 6 years without a word. I found my voice. Though it came out smaller than I'd intended, I had my reasons. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it held no warmth. "I'm sure you did. Tell me about the child." The way he said it, the child, not your child or my child, sent a chill down my spine. Did he know? How could he possibly know? "What about her?" "Her name is Sienna, according to the medical records. She's 5 years old." His eyes narrowed slightly. "The math is interesting, wouldn't you say?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to meet his gaze steadily. "What are you implying?" Sebastian moved then, crossing the small space between us with the fluid grace of a predator. He stopped just close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that brought back a flood of unwanted memories. "I'm not implying anything, Samantha. I'm stating facts. You disappeared 6 years ago, 3 weeks after our last night together. Now I discover you have a daughter who would have been conceived right around that time." The clinical way he laid out the timeline made my stomach clench. Of course he would have figured it out. Sebastian had always been frighteningly intelligent, able to see patterns and connections that others missed. It was part of what made him so dangerous. "Even if what you're suggesting were true," I said carefully, "what difference would it make? You're here to help a sick child. That's all that matters." His hand came up to cup my chin, the touch so gentle it was almost worse than if he'd been rough. "Everything about you matters to me, Samantha. It always has." I jerked away from his touch, my heart racing. Don't do this, Sebastian. Whatever game you're playing, this isn't a game." His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more intimidating than if he'd shouted. "This is about my daughter lying in a hospital bed, dying from a disease I might be able to cure." The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter. He'd said it with such certainty, such possession, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. She's not what? Not mine?" He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a photo of Sienna from her medical file, but beside it was another photo, one that made my blood run cold. It was Sebastian as a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and the resemblance was unmistakable. The same storm gray eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of holding her head when she was thinking. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. "From my mother's photo albums. Amazing what you can see when you know what to look for." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "The question now is what we're going to do about it." I sank into one of the conference room chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support me. 6 years of running, 6 years of building a life away from his world, and it had all been for nothing. He'd found us, and worse, he knew the truth I'd tried so desperately to hide. "What do you want?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Sebastian sat across from me, his movements deliberate and controlled. "First, I want the transplant to proceed. Sienna will have the surgery, and she will recover." "And second?" "Second, we're going to discuss the arrangements for my daughter's future, and yours." The possessive way he said my daughter sent ice through my veins. This was what I'd feared, what I'd run from 6 years ago. Sebastian Russo didn't just love, he owned. He collected beautiful things and dangerous people, and kept them in a world where his word was law. Sebastian, please. She's just a child. She doesn't need to be part of your world. My world? He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, I saw a flash of genuine anger in his eyes. You mean the world where she would have had the best medical care from birth? Where she would never have wanted for anything? Where she would have been protected by everything I've built? Protected by blood money and violence, I shot back. Protected by fear and intimidation. Protected by me. The quiet intensity in his voice was more frightening than any shout. And she will be from now on. Both of you will be. You can't just decide that. I have a life, Sebastian. I have a job, an apartment. Sienna has friends at school. Had. He corrected gently. You had those things. As of this morning, your landlord received an offer he couldn't refuse for your building. Your employer received a very generous donation that came with a suggestion that your position was no longer necessary. And Sienna's school received notification that she would be transferring to a private institution more suited to her needs. The room seemed to tilt around me. You can't do this. You can't just uproot our entire lives because you feel like it. I can do whatever I want, Samantha. I thought you would have remembered that. He stood again, straightening his cufflinks in a gesture that was purely unconscious, but spoke to years of absolute power. But I prefer cooperation to coercion. Play along, and this transition will be smooth for everyone involved. And if I don't? The smile that curved his lips was cold and sharp as winter. Then you'll discover that 6 years hasn't changed me as much as you might have hoped. My phone buzzed on the table between us, and Sebastian's gaze flicked to it. Aren't you going to answer? It might be important. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone. It was a text from my sister Scarlett. Sam, call me immediately. Something's happened. I looked up to find Sebastian watching me with an expression of mild interest. Family emergency? He asked with false concern. What did you do? I simply made sure your sister understood the gravity of the situation. She's very concerned about Sienna's welfare, you know. When I explained that I was the only donor match and that I wanted to ensure the family was properly taken care of during this difficult time, she was quite grateful for my offer of assistance. The phone rang in my hand, and Scarlett's name appeared on the screen. Sebastian gestured for me to answer it. Scarlett, I said, my voice barely steady. Sam, thank God. Listen, I just met with this Mr. Russo, and he explained everything about Sienna's treatment. He says he can help her, but that you're being stubborn about accepting his assistance. Scarlett's voice was strained with worry and confusion. Sam, what's going on? He says he's offering to cover all the medical expenses and help us relocate somewhere with better specialists. Why would you hesitate about something like that? I closed my eyes, feeling the walls of Sebastian's trap closing around me. Of course Scarlett would see it that way. A wealthy philanthropist offering to save her niece's life. She had no idea who Sebastian really was, what accepting his help would really mean. It's complicated, Scar. Complicated how? Sam, this man could save Sienna's life. He's offering us everything we need, and you're hesitating? I don't understand. I met Sebastian's gaze across the table. He was watching me with the patience of a spider that knew its web was perfectly constructed. I need to think about it. Think about what? Sam, are you listening to yourself? Sienna is dying. This man is offering to help. What is there to think about? After I hung up, Sebastian leaned forward slightly. Your sister seems like a practical woman. Much more practical than you've become. Don't you dare drag her into this. I'm not dragging anyone anywhere, Samantha. I'm offering solutions to problems. You need medical care for our daughter. I can provide it. You need financial security. I can provide that too. You need protection from the kind of people who might use a sick child to get to me. And believe me, there are such people. I can provide that as well. The casual mention of threats against Sienna made my blood run cold. No one even knows she exists. They do now. The moment my name appeared on those medical records, the moment I walked into this hospital, she became a target. You've spent 6 years trying to keep her away from my world, but that world has already found her. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, the touch sending unwanted electricity up my arm. The only question now is whether she faces it with my protection or without it. I stared down at our joined hands, his dark skin a stark contrast against my pale fingers. He was right, and we both knew it. The moment Sienna had been matched with his bone marrow, any hope of anonymity had vanished. If Sebastian Russo had a child, that child would be a target for his enemies, a potential weakness to exploit. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked quietly. "The transplant happens as soon as possible. During her recovery, you'll both stay at my estate where she can receive the best possible care. After she's fully recovered, we'll discuss permanent arrangements. And if I refuse, then you'll explain to our daughter why you chose your pride over her life." The cruel accuracy of the statement hit me like a slap. He was backing me into a corner with the one thing I couldn't fight, Sienna's welfare. And he knew it. "I need time to explain things to her," I said finally, the words tasting like defeat. "Of course. I'll have my medical team coordinate with Dr. Martinez to schedule the procedure. We'll aim for early next week." Sebastian stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Samantha, I know you're angry, and I know you're afraid, but I need you to understand something. I would have done anything to keep you 6 years ago. Anything. The fact that you were carrying my child." He shook his head. "If I had known, I never would have let you leave." After he was gone, I sat alone in the sterile conference room, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, my carefully constructed life had crumbled around me. Sebastian knew about Sienna, knew she was his daughter, and he intended to claim them both. But as I made my way back to Sienna's room, one thought kept echoing in my mind. He was right about the danger. The moment his name had been connected to ours, we'd become pawns in a game far more dangerous than anything I'd feared when I ran away 6 years ago. Sienna was awake when I returned, her small face brightening at the sight of me. "Mommy, did you talk to the man who's going to help me?" I sat on the edge of her bed and took her tiny hand in mine. "Yes, sweetheart. He's going to help make you better." "Is he nice?" I looked into her trusting eyes, Sebastian's eyes, and felt my heart break a little more. "He's complicated, but he wants to help you very much." "Good," she said with the simple faith of a child. "I want to get better so we can go home." I squeezed her hand gently, not having the heart to tell her that after Sebastian Russo was finished with us, we might never have a home to go back to. The next morning brought a parade of specialists that I hadn't expected, doctors I'd never met, speaking in hushed tones about treatment protocols and recovery timelines that seemed far more aggressive than anything Dr. Martinez had previously discussed. Sebastian's influence was already reshaping Sienna's care, transforming her from a charity case into a VIP patient worthy of the hospital's most advanced resources. I'd spent the night in the uncomfortable bedside chair, watching Sienna sleep and trying to reconcile the man I'd fled from 6 years ago with the one who was now orchestrating what amounted to a medical miracle for our daughter. The Sebastian I remembered had been dangerous, yes, but also passionate and surprisingly gentle when he thought no one was watching. The man I'd met yesterday seemed harder, more calculating, but underneath it all, I could still see glimpses of the person who had once made me believe in fairy tales. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway around 10, looking slightly overwhelmed. "Sam, we need to discuss some changes to Sienna's treatment plan." I followed her to her office, where she spread out a collection of charts and test results that hadn't been there the day before. "Mr. Russo's medical team has requested some additional testing. They want to ensure everything is optimized before the transplant. His medical team? Apparently he maintains a staff of specialists for his philanthropic work. They're very thorough. She paused, studying my expression. Sam, I have to ask, what's your relationship with this man? The level of attention he's providing is unusual, even for someone as generous as he appears to be. I chose my words carefully. We have history. Complicated history. Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. He's also arranged for Sienna to be transferred to a private wing for the duration of her treatment. Better security, he said. Is there something I should know about? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Sebastian's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach clenched. I should take this. Samantha. His voice was warm, almost intimate, as if we were lovers making casual plans instead of former. Whatever we'd been. Navigating a crisis. How is Sienna this morning? She's stable. Dr. Martinez says there are new tests being ordered. Precautionary measures. I want to ensure everything goes perfectly. There was a pause. I'm sending a car for you this afternoon. We need to discuss some details about the arrangements. I'm not leaving Sienna. She'll be perfectly safe. I have security stationed at the hospital now, and my medical team will be monitoring her constantly. This shouldn't take more than an hour. The casual mention of security made my pulse quicken. Sebastian, what kind of threats are we talking about? You said she was a target now. Nothing immediate. But word travels fast in certain circles, and I prefer to be proactive about these things. His tone remained conversational, but I could hear the steel underneath. The car will be there at 2. The line went dead before I could protest further. I stared at the phone, frustration and fear warring in my chest. This was how it had always been with Sebastian. He made decisions and expected compliance, wielding his power so effortlessly that resistance seemed almost childish. But I wasn't the same woman who had fallen for his commanding presence 6 years ago. I was a mother now, and every instinct I had screamed against putting my daughter deeper into his world. Sam? Dr. Martinez was watching me with concern. Is everything all right? Fine, I lied. Just coordinating some details. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of medical consultations and new faces, specialists who deferred to Sebastian's team, nurses who spoke in respectful whispers, and administrators who treated me with a level of attention I'd never experienced before. It was as if Sebastian's influence had transformed not just Sienna's care, but our entire standing in the medical hierarchy. At exactly 2 o'clock, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the hospital entrance. The driver was a large man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Marcus and assured me that Sienna would be watched over during my absence. As we drove through the city streets, I tried to prepare myself for whatever Sebastian had planned. The car turned through an imposing set of gates and up a long driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. Sebastian's estate was exactly what I would have expected. A sprawling mansion that spoke of old money and older power, situated on grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It was beautiful in a way that was almost intimidating, the kind of beauty that reminded you exactly how much distance existed between different worlds. Marcus escorted me to a study lined with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. Sebastian was standing behind a massive mahogany desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian to someone who was clearly receiving instructions rather than participating in a conversation. He looked up when I entered and gestured for me to take a seat in one of the deep leather chairs facing his desk. Capisco. Rendilo così, he said into the phone before ending the call and focusing his full attention on me. Even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his lean build, he radiated the kind of authority that made it clear why people did what he told them to do. Thank you for coming, he said, settling into his own chair with fluid grace. Coffee? Something stronger? I just want to know what this is about. You said we needed to discuss arrangements. Sebastian opened a folder on his desk and withdrew a set of documents. The transplant is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Sienna will be in surgery for approximately 4 hours, followed by a recovery period of 6 to 8 weeks. During that time, she'll need to be isolated from potential infections and monitored constantly. He slid a photograph across the desk toward me. It showed a beautifully appointed medical suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens, more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital. This is the medical wing of my estate, fully equipped, staffed with around-the-clock nursing care, and completely secure. You want to bring her here? To your house? I want to ensure she receives the best possible care in the safest possible environment. His tone was reasonable, but his eyes held that familiar, implacable quality that suggested the decision was already made. The alternative is keeping her in the hospital for 2 months, exposed to every infection that walks through those doors. I studied the photograph, hating that his logic made sense. Sienna would be safer here, would recover faster in a beautiful environment designed specifically for her needs. But accepting meant stepping fully into Sebastian's world, giving him the access to our daughter that I'd spent 6 years denying him. There's more, he continued, producing another set of documents. I've arranged for you to take a leave of absence from your current employment. You mean the job you had me fired from? And during Sienna's recovery, you'll stay here as well. There are quarters prepared for you adjacent to hers. The assumption in his voice, the casual way he'd planned out our lives without consulting me, ignited a familiar spark of anger. You don't get to just rearrange our lives because it's convenient for you, Sebastian. I'm not rearranging them for my convenience. I'm restructuring them for our daughter's survival. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Samantha, I understand that you're angry. I understand that you don't trust me. But I need you to understand something. What? That you're in control? That you always get what you want? Believe me, I remember. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. I need you to understand that I've spent 6 years wondering what I did wrong. 6 years replaying our last conversation, trying to figure out what I said or didn't say that made you disappear without a trace. The quiet honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the commanding authority I'd expected, but something more vulnerable. Sebastian, I know what I am, Samantha. I know the world I inhabit isn't suitable for everyone. But when I cared about you, when I loved you, I would have done anything to keep you safe. Anything to make it work. The past tense of his words shouldn't have stung, but it did. You loved me, but you lied to me. You told me you were an import-export, that your family had shipping interests. You never mentioned that your business involved money laundering and territory disputes and people who disappeared when they crossed you. His jaw tightened. I was protecting you. The less you knew, the less I knew, the easier it was for you to control the situation, just like now. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked his perfectly landscaped grounds. This is exactly why I left, Sebastian. This assumption that you know what's best, that everyone else's opinions and feelings are just obstacles to be managed. Is that really why you left? His voice was closer now, and I turned to find him standing just a few feet away. Or did you leave because you were afraid of how much you wanted to stay? The question hit too close to home, bringing back memories I'd tried to bury. The last night we'd spent together, when he'd talked about the future, with a certainty that had both thrilled and terrified me, the way he'd looked at me when I'd asked too many questions about his business, with a mixture of desire and exasperation that had made it clear he'd expected me to simply accept what he gave me without demanding more. I was 22 years old, Sebastian. I was scared and alone. And when I finally understood what your world really looked like, I knew I couldn't handle it. You weren't alone. You had me. I had someone who made decisions for me, who eliminated problems without telling me how, who expected me to be grateful for a life I'd never chosen. I turned back to the window, my reflection ghostly in the glass. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't raise a child in that world. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding. When Sebastian spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. And now that child is dying, and my world is the only thing that can save her. The brutal honesty of it made my chest tight. I know. Believe me. I know. So what do we do? Samantha? How do we move forward from here? I turned to face him, studying the man who had once been everything to me and was now the solution to my worst nightmare. I'll agree to bring Sienna here during her recovery, but I want conditions. His eyebrow arched. Such as? No involvement in your business, no exposure to anything illegal, no weapons, no violence, no meetings with dangerous people while we're here. Agreed. And when she's recovered, we leave. You can visit her. You can be part of her life, but we maintain our independence. Something cold flashed in his eyes. That's not acceptable. Then we don't have a deal. Sebastian moved closer, close enough that I could see the fine lines around his eyes. The way his hair had gray threads at the temples that hadn't been there 6 years ago. You're asking me to let my daughter walk away again. To pretend that she doesn't belong in my life. I'm asking you to let us choose how much of your life we can handle. And I'm telling you, that choice is no longer yours to make. His voice was gentle, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. The moment Sienna became my genetic match, she became part of something bigger than your fears and my regrets. There are people who would hurt her to get to me, people who would use her as leverage or revenge. The only way to keep her safe is to keep her close. The casual mention of threats against our daughter made my blood run cold. No one knows she's yours except us. Marcus knows. My medical team knows. Dr. Martinez suspects, and hospital records are never as secure as people think they are. Sebastian reached out and touched my arm, his fingers warm through the fabric of my sweater. I'm not the only one with enemies in this city, Samantha. The families I've displaced, the businesses I've disrupted, the people who think they can take what I've built, they're all looking for ways to hurt me. And now they have one. I jerked away from his touch, my heart racing. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I ran. And your running put her in more danger, not less. If you'd stayed, if you'd let me know about the pregnancy, she would have been protected from birth. Instead, she spent 5 years completely vulnerable, and now we're scrambling to secure a situation that should have been handled years ago. The guilt in his words was a knife twist, because part of me knew he was right. If Sienna had grown up in his world, she would have had the best medical care available, would never have suffered through the long nights when I couldn't afford her medications, would never have been in a position where her life depended on finding a stranger willing to donate bone marrow. But she also would have grown up surrounded by violence and moral compromise, would have learned that problems were solved through intimidation and force, would have inherited a legacy of blood and fear that I'd spent her entire life trying to spare her. I need time to think, I said finally. Sebastian nodded, moving back to his desk. Of course. But Samantha, the surgery is tomorrow morning. Whatever you decide, it needs to be decided tonight. As Marcus drove me back to the hospital, I stared out the window at the city passing by and tried to reconcile the impossible choice Sebastian was offering me. Save my daughter's life by surrendering her to a world I'd spent 6 years fleeing, or maintain our independence and watch her die. When I reached Sienna's room, she was awake and coloring in a book that hadn't been there when I left. "Mommy, look what the nice man brought me." My heart stopped. "What nice man, sweetheart?" "The one who's going to help me get better. He came to visit while you were gone." She held up her coloring book proudly. "He said I could keep it, and that tomorrow we're going to go somewhere special where I can get better faster." I sank into the bedside chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Sebastian had been here, had met our daughter, had made promises I hadn't agreed to yet. The casual way he'd inserted himself into her world, the assumption that his decisions were already final, was exactly the kind of behavior that had driven me away years ago. But when I looked at Sienna's face, bright with hope for the first time in months, I realized that Sebastian had understood something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Our daughter was dying, and his world, dangerous and morally complex as it was, might be the only thing that could save her. "Did you like him?" I asked carefully. Sienna nodded enthusiastically. "He has nice eyes like mine, and he knew my favorite color without me telling him." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "He seemed sad, though, like he was missing someone important." The simple observation hit me like a physical blow. Even at 5 years old, Sienna had inherited Sebastian's ability to see beneath the surface, to understand things that adults tried to hide. And somehow, in their brief meeting, she'd recognized something in him that I'd been too angry and afraid to acknowledge. "Mommy, are you crying?" I wiped at my eyes quickly, not having realized that tears had started falling. "Just happy tears, baby. Happy that someone wants to help you so much." That night, after Sienna had fallen asleep, I sat in the dark hospital room and made the hardest decision of my life. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sebastian's number, my hands shaking as I waited for him to answer. "Samantha." His voice was warm, as if he'd been expecting my call. "I'll bring her to your estate during recovery," I said without preamble. But I wanted in writing all the conditions we discussed. "And Sebastian?" "Yes?" "If you ever put her in danger, if your world ever touches her in a way that could hurt her, I'll disappear again. And this time, you'll never find us." There was a long pause before he spoke. And when he did, his voice carried a weight of promise that was somehow more binding than any legal document. "I would die before letting anything happen to either of you. Both of you are precious to me, Samantha. More precious than you know." After I hung up, I sat staring at Sienna's sleeping face, memorizing every detail before everything changed forever. Tomorrow, she would have Sebastian's bone marrow flowing through her veins, would begin the process of healing that would bind her to him in ways that went deeper than genetics. And I would step back into a world I'd sworn never to enter again, all for love of a child who carried the best and most dangerous parts of both of us. The surgery took 4.5 hours. I spent every minute of it pacing the private waiting room Sebastian had arranged, my stomach churning with a combination of fear and caffeine from the endless cups of coffee well-meaning nurses kept bringing me. Sebastian sat in one of the leather chairs, ostensibly reading reports from his phone, but I caught him checking his watch every few minutes with the kind of barely controlled tension that reminded me he was just as terrified as I was. Dr. Martinez emerged just after 3 in the afternoon, still in her surgical scrubs but smiling. "The transplant went perfectly. Sienna is in recovery now, and early indicators suggest her body is already beginning to accept the new bone marrow." The relief was so intense it nearly knocked me to my knees. Sebastian was beside me instantly, his hand steady at my elbow as I swayed slightly. "Can we see her?" "She'll be unconscious for several more hours, but yes. Recovery Suite 4. I followed Dr. Martinez down a corridor I'd never seen before, one that required a special keycard to access. The recovery suites were nothing like the standard hospital rooms. They were spacious and comfortable, with natural light and furniture that looked more residential than medical. But it was the man standing guard outside Suite 4 that made my breath catch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of alertness that spoke of military training and the subtle bulge of a concealed weapon. When he saw Sebastian, he nodded respectfully and stepped aside. "This is Victor," Sebastian said quietly. "He'll be coordinating Sienna's security detail during her recovery." "Security detail?" I turned to stare at him. "Sebastian, she's a 5-year-old recovering from surgery, not a head of state. She's my daughter. The distinction is less relevant than you might think." The casual way he claimed her, as if 6 years of separation had never happened, sent a familiar spike of anger through my chest. But when I looked through the observation window at Sienna's small form surrounded by monitors and IV lines, the anger faded into something more complex. She was alive. The surgery had worked. Everything else could be dealt with later. Dr. Martinez spent 20 minutes explaining the recovery process, the medication Sienna would need, the potential complications to watch for. Sebastian listened with the focused intensity he brought to everything important, asking detailed questions that demonstrated he'd done extensive research beyond what his medical team had already provided. The next 72 hours are critical, Dr. Martinez concluded. If there are no signs of rejection or infection, we'll be able to transfer her to your private facility for the remainder of her recovery. And how long before she's fully recovered? I asked. 6 to 8 weeks for the bone marrow to fully engraft. After that, gradual return to normal activities over several months. She looked between Sebastian and me. Children are remarkably resilient, but this will be a significant adjustment period for the whole family. Family. The word hung in the air between us, laden with implications none of us were quite ready to address. When Dr. Martinez left, Sebastian and I stood on opposite sides of Sienna's bed, watching her sleep. The monitors beeped softly, and her breathing was deep and even, better than it had been in months. For the first time since her diagnosis, she looked peaceful instead of struggling. "She's beautiful," Sebastian said quietly. "Even sick, even exhausted, she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Wonder, maybe, or the kind of fierce protectiveness that comes with new parenthood. It reminded me of how I'd felt the first time I'd held her, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the love and the terrifying realization that this tiny person would always be the most important thing in my world. "She looks like you when she's thinking," I said. "The same expression you get when you're working out a problem." Sebastian's mouth curved in a small smile. "And she has your stubbornness. She informed me very seriously that she doesn't like green vegetables but will eat them if they're disguised properly." Despite everything, I found myself smiling too. "She negotiated with you on vegetables?" "Quite effectively. I suspect she'll be formidable when she's older." The easy conversation felt strange after the tension of the past few days, but also familiar in a way that made my chest ache. This was how it had been between us 6 years ago, before I'd understood the full scope of what his life entailed. Comfortable silences and shared observations, the kind of connection that had made me believe we could build something lasting together. "Sebastian," I said carefully, "when she wakes up, what are we going to tell her? About you? About the situation?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving Sienna's face. "The truth, I think. Age-appropriate but honest. She deserves to know who I am." "And what exactly is that? What do we call you?" Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "What do you think I should be called?" The question caught me off guard. In all my preparations for this confrontation, I'd never considered that Sebastian might be uncertain about his role in Sienna's life. He'd been so commanding about everything else, so certain of his rights and intentions, that it hadn't occurred to me he might be as lost as I was when it came to the practical realities of sudden parenthood. "She's 5 years old," I said finally. "She's going to have questions about why you weren't around before, about why her last name is different from yours, about why this is all happening now. What have you told her about her father?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. That he was someone I cared about who couldn't be part of our lives. That it wasn't his fault or hers, just the way things worked out. Sebastian nodded slowly. "Then we tell her that circumstances have changed. That I can be part of her life now. And I want to be. And the other parts, your business, the security, the reason we can't just go back to our normal lives, we tell her that some people have jobs that require extra safety measures, that there are bodyguards because I'm important enough that some people might try to hurt the people I care about." His eyes met mine across the bed. Children accept more than adults give them credit for, Samantha. As long as she feels safe and loved, the details matter less than you think. Before I could respond, Sienna stirred slightly, making a small sound of discomfort. I was beside her instantly, smoothing her hair and murmuring soft reassurances. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as she took in her surroundings. "Mommy." Her voice was scratchy from the breathing tube they'd removed after surgery. "I'm here, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Tired, and my chest hurts." She turned her head slightly and noticed Sebastian standing on the other side of the bed. "Oh, the nice man is here too." Sebastian moved closer, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Hello, Sienna. I'm Sebastian. How are you feeling?" "Better, I think. Did the surgery work? Am I going to get well now?" "The doctors think so," I said. "It's going to take some time, but yes, you should get much better." Sienna studied Sebastian with the direct, unself-conscious gaze that children used when they were trying to figure something out. "You have the same eyes as me." "I do," Sebastian agreed. "We have the same blood, too. That's why I was able to help you." "Are you related to me?" The question hung in the air, and I saw Sebastian glance at me uncertainly. This was the moment we'd discussed, but facing it with our daughter looking between us with trusting curiosity was more difficult than either of us had anticipated. "Yes," Sebastian said gently. "I'm your father." Sienna absorbed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children brought to most revelations. "Oh, that's why you knew my favorite color." "That's part of it," Sebastian smiled. "Fathers usually know things like that about their daughters." "Where have you been?" The question was asked without accusation, just simple curiosity. "I didn't know about you," Sebastian said honestly. "Your mother and I lost touch before you were born. But now that I do know about you, I'd like to be part of your life, if that's okay with you." Sienna considered this seriously. "Will you read me stories?" "If you'd like me to." "And help me with puzzles?" "Mommy's not very good at puzzles." I made a sound of mock offense. "I am too good at puzzles." Sienna giggled, the first time I'd heard that sound in months. "You always try to force pieces that don't fit." "I promise to be better at puzzles than your mother," Sebastian said solemnly. And something in his voice made me think he was talking about more than children's games. The next 3 days passed in a surreal blur of medical consultations, security briefings, and the strange domesticity of sharing Sienna's care with Sebastian. He was surprisingly good with her, patient with her questions, gentle with her medications, and endlessly inventive when it came to keeping her entertained during the long hours of bed rest. But it was the quiet moments that affected me most. The way he watched her sleep with an expression of fierce protectiveness. The careful way he helped her with meals when her hands were shaky from medication. The genuine delight he showed when she laughed at his terrible jokes. This was a side of Sebastian I'd never seen before, and it complicated every assumption I'd made about his capacity for tenderness. On the 4th day, Dr. Martinez cleared Sienna for transfer to Sebastian's estate. The medical transport vehicle that arrived looked more like a luxury ambulance than a standard transport, equipped with every possible monitoring device and staffed by 2 nurses who treated Sienna like precious cargo. "Ready for this?" Sebastian asked, as we prepared to leave the hospital. I looked around the room that had been our world for the past week, then at Sienna, who was excited about going somewhere new. "No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready." "That's all right," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out as we go." As the transport pulled away from the hospital, I watched the city pass by through tinted windows and tried to prepare myself for whatever came next. I was taking my daughter into Sebastian Russo's world, a world of wealth and danger and moral complexity that I'd spent 6 years trying to escape. But she was alive, and she was going to stay alive. And for now, that had to be enough. The estate looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more like the kind of place where families might actually live. The medical wing Sebastian had shown me in photographs was even more impressive in person. A series of connected rooms that had been designed with both Sienna's immediate needs and long-term comfort in mind. "This is mine?" Sienna asked in wonder, as the nurses helped her into the hospital bed that had been positioned near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. "This is yours," Sebastian confirmed. "And that room next door is your mother's, so she'll always be close by." "And where is your room?" "Just down the hall. Close enough to help if you need anything, but far enough away that you and your mother have privacy." The diplomatic way he described the sleeping arrangements made it clear he'd thought carefully about boundaries and comfort levels. My room, when he showed it to me later, was spacious and beautifully appointed, with its own sitting area and a door that connected directly to Sienna's room. It was luxurious beyond anything I'd ever experienced, but it was also clearly designed to make me feel like a guest rather than a prisoner. "There's a full staff to help with anything you need," Sebastian explained as we toured the medical wing. "Dr. Chen will be staying here for the first week to monitor Sienna's progress, and there are nurses available around the clock. But I want you to feel comfortable making decisions about her care." The consideration in his arrangements was unexpected. I'd been prepared for him to take over completely, to treat us like possessions he'd finally reclaimed. Instead, he seemed genuinely committed to making the transition as easy as possible. "Why are you being so accommodating?" I asked when we were alone in the hallway between our rooms. Sebastian leaned against the wall, and for the first time since this all began, he looked tired. "Because I don't want you to run again, Samantha. Because I want Sienna to feel safe here. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I've learned that the things worth having can't be taken by force. And if I still want to leave when she's recovered?" Something indefinable passed across his face. "Then we'll discuss it when the time comes." It wasn't the promise of freedom I'd hoped for, but it wasn't the explicit threat of captivity I'd feared either. For now, it would have to be enough. That evening, as Sienna drifted off to sleep in her new room, I stood at the window looking out at Sebastian's gardens and tried to process how dramatically our lives had changed in less than a week. My daughter was alive and healing, surrounded by luxury and medical care beyond anything I could have provided. But we were also deeper in Sebastian's world than I'd ever intended to go, dependent on his protection and generosity in ways that made true independence seem increasingly impossible. A soft knock at my door interrupted my brooding. Sebastian stood in the hallway, holding 2 glasses of wine and looking uncertain in a way that reminded me powerfully of the man I'd once loved. "I thought you might like some company," he said. "But if you'd prefer to be alone." I stepped aside to let him in, accepting the wine with hands that weren't quite steady. "Thank you. For today, for all of this. I know I haven't been gracious about it, but I do appreciate what you've done for her. She's my daughter too, Samantha. There's nothing I wouldn't do for her." He moved to the window, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Nothing I wouldn't do for either of you." The quiet intensity in his voice made my pulse quicken. This was dangerous territory, the kind of emotional honesty that had gotten me into trouble with him before. But with Sienna safe in the next room, and Sebastian looking at me with an expression that was equal parts desire and uncertainty, it was hard to remember why I'd been so determined to keep my distance. "Sebastian," I said carefully, "we need to be clear about what this is. I'm here for Sienna's recovery, not to pick up where we left off 6 years ago." "I know." He turned from the window to face me, his gray eyes serious. "But I also know that what was between us didn't end because we stopped caring about each other." The truth of that statement hung between us, impossible to deny. Whatever else had gone wrong 6 years ago, the connection between us had been real and powerful, and unlike anything either of us had experienced before or since. Caring about each other was never the problem, I said quietly. The problem was everything else. Your world, your expectations, the way you made decisions for both of us without considering what I wanted. And what do you want now, Samantha? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. What I wanted was impossible. For Sienna to be healthy and safe. For Sebastian to be the man I'd thought he was 6 years ago. For us to find a way to be together that didn't require me to surrender everything I'd built for myself. What I wanted was a fairy tale. And Sebastian Russo dealt in realities that were far more complex and dangerous. I want time, I said finally. Time to figure out how to be Sienna's parents without repeating the mistakes we made before. Sebastian nodded slowly, though something in his expression suggested he wanted to push for more. Time then. But Samantha? Yes? I'm not the same man I was 6 years ago, and you're not the same woman. Maybe it's worth finding out who we are now before we decide what's impossible. After he left, I sat in the comfortable chair by the window and tried to ignore the way my heart had sped up at his words. Sebastian was right. We were both different now, shaped by years and experiences and responsibilities that hadn't existed when we'd first fallen for each other. But some things never changed, and the dangerous pull I felt toward him was apparently one of them. In the next room, Sienna slept peacefully, her breathing deep and even, her body already beginning to respond to the new bone marrow that would save her life. Whatever happened between Sebastian and me, our daughter was going to be all right. For tonight, that was enough. 3 weeks into Sienna's recovery, I began to understand the true scope of Sebastian's world, and why leaving it might be more complicated than I'd imagined. What had initially seemed like generous hospitality slowly revealed itself as something more systematic and encompassing. The estate wasn't just a home. It was a carefully controlled environment where every detail was managed with the precision of a military operation. The revelation came gradually, through small observations that accumulated into an undeniable picture. The gardeners who wore earpieces and moved with tactical awareness. The maintenance staff, whose tool belts contained more than just wrenches and screwdrivers. The way certain areas of the estate were casually off limits, blocked by locked doors, and polite but firm redirections from household staff. But it was the morning I noticed the same black sedan that had been parked outside Sienna's previous school, now stationed at the end of our hospital wing's corridor, that I realized Sebastian's protection had extended far beyond what he'd told me. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked him that evening after Sienna had fallen asleep. We'd developed a routine of sorts. He would visit during dinner, helping Sienna with her physical therapy exercises, or reading to her from the collection of books that seemed to multiply daily in her room. Afterward, we would often sit in my sitting area, maintaining the careful distance of two people trying to navigate an impossible situation. Sebastian looked up from the report he'd been reading, his expression carefully neutral. "Watching you?" The car outside her school. The man who started working at the coffee shop I went to every morning 6 months ago. The new neighbor who moved in across from our apartment building last spring. I set down my wine glass with deliberate precision. "How long, Sebastian?" For a moment he was silent, and I could see him calculating how much truth to reveal. 2 years, he said finally, "since I discovered you were in the city." The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. 2 years? You've been spying on us for 2 years? "I've been ensuring your safety for 2 years, he corrected, his voice remaining calm despite the accusation in mine. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it feels a lot like stalking." Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 of my business associates have children who have been targeted by rivals in the past 5 years. 1 attempted kidnapping, 1 successful extortion, 1 murder that was meant to send a message to the father. His gray eyes met mine steadily. The moment I discovered I had a daughter, she became a potential target. Watching from a distance was the only way to protect her without disrupting the life you'd built. The clinical way he described threats against children made my stomach clench. If you knew about her for 2 years, why didn't you approach us sooner? Because you'd made it clear you wanted nothing to do with my world. I respected that choice as long as I could. His expression grew complicated. But when her medical condition worsened, when she needed help you couldn't provide, you manipulated the situation to force a reunion. I saved her life, and the words carried no apology, only statement of fact. Everything else is secondary to that. I stood up abruptly, needing to pace, needing movement to channel the anger and confusion coursing through me. Do you understand how violated this makes me feel? Knowing that we had no privacy, no real independence? That every choice I thought I was making freely was actually being influenced by your surveillance? Sebastian rose as well, moving to intercept my pacing without crowding me. Every choice you made was your own, Samantha. My people observed, they didn't interfere. When you struggled with rent, they didn't mysteriously provide money. When Sienna was sick before this, they didn't arrange for better medical care. I watched you both suffer through problems I could have solved easily because I was trying to respect the boundaries you'd set. The pain in his voice gave me pause. I'd been so focused on my own sense of violation that I hadn't considered what it must have cost him to watch from a distance while his daughter struggled with poverty and illness. But you were always planning to step in eventually, I said. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. He moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where security personnel moved in patterns that were designed to look casual, but weren't. I was hoping that someday you might reach out voluntarily, that you might decide you were ready to let me be part of your lives. And when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, when it became clear that my daughter was dying, and my presence was the only thing that could save her, the choice became simple. He turned back to me, his expression implacable. I would do anything to protect her, Samantha. Anything. Even if it meant forcing my way back into your life against your will. The absolute certainty in his voice was both terrifying and, if I was being honest with myself, oddly reassuring. Whatever else Sebastian was, he was completely committed to Sienna's welfare. What happens now? I asked. She's getting better. In a few weeks she'll be fully recovered. What then? Then we figure out how to be a family. And if I don't want to be a family with you? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. That's not really an option anymore. The quiet menace in his words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? Sebastian moved closer, his movements deliberate and controlled. I mean that the moment Sienna became known as my daughter, certain things became inevitable. There are people who would hurt her to hurt me. People who see family members as acceptable casualties in business disputes. The protection I can provide isn't something you can simply walk away from. You're saying we're prisoners here. I'm saying you're safe here. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like the same thing. Sebastian's expression softened slightly. Samantha, I know this isn't the life you would have chosen. I know it's not fair to have these decisions made for you. But I can't let anything happen to either of you. I won't. Before I could respond, a soft voice from the doorway interrupted us. Mommy? Why are you and Daddy Sebastian arguing? We both turned to find Sienna standing in the connecting doorway, clutching the stuffed elephant Sebastian had brought her the week before. She looked small and fragile in her nightgown, but her color was good, and she was moving without the exhaustion that had characterized her movements for months. We're not arguing, sweetheart, I said, moving to her immediately. We're just discussing some grown-up things. You should be sleeping. I had a bad dream, she said, allowing me to guide her back toward her bed. I dreamed that we had to go back to the old apartment, and you were sad all the time again. The innocent observation cut deeper than any accusation Sebastian could have made. Without realizing it, Sienna had identified something I'd been trying not to acknowledge, that despite my fears about Sebastian's world, our life here was better in almost every measurable way. She was healthy and happy, surrounded by beauty and comfort, and people who cared about her welfare. And I, if I was being honest, was more relaxed than I'd been in years, free from the constant stress of financial worry and single parenthood. "That was just a dream, baby," Sebastian said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "You're safe here, and you're going to stay safe. Promise?" Sienna looked between us with the trusting gaze that made every adult decision feel monumentally important. "Promise," Sebastian said solemnly. "Nothing bad is going to happen to you or your mother while I'm here to prevent it." After we'd tucked Sienna back into bed and she'd drifted off to sleep, Sebastian and I stood in the hallway between our rooms, the weight of unfinished conversation hanging between us. "She's starting to think of this as home," I said quietly. "Would that be so terrible?" I looked around at the beautiful space we'd been inhabiting for 3 weeks, at the evidence of wealth and security that surrounded us. "I don't know. Maybe not for her. But for me. For you, it represents everything you ran from 6 years ago." "Yes." I met his gaze steadily. "And I still don't know if I can handle it." Sebastian nodded slowly. "I understand. But Samantha, I need you to understand something too. I'm not going to let you disappear again. Not with Sienna. Not without her. Whatever we build from here, it has to include all 3 of us." The finality in his words should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a strange combination of relief and resignation. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of fighting a battle I'd already lost. Or perhaps it was the growing realization that Sienna was safer and happier here than she'd ever been anywhere else. But for the first time since this all began, I found myself considering what it might mean to stop running and start building something new. "I need conditions," I said finally. "Name them." "Full transparency about any threats or security concerns. No more surveillance or manipulation. And if I ever feel like Sienna is being exposed to genuine danger because of your business, we're gone." Sebastian considered this for a moment. "The first 2 agreed. The third isn't negotiable. If there's danger, you stay close to me, not farther away." "Sebastian, no." His voice was gentle but absolutely firm. "I won't compromise on your safety or hers. Everything else we can work out, but that's not up for discussion." I studied his face, seeing the implacable determination that had probably made him successful in a world where weakness could be fatal. "And what about us? What happens between you and me?" Something vulnerable flickered across his features. "What do you want to happen?" It was the same question he'd asked before, and I still didn't have a clear answer. What I wanted was complex and contradictory. I wanted the safety and security he offered, but also the independence I'd fought to build. I wanted the man I'd fallen in love with 6 years ago, but without the dangerous world that came with him. I wanted fairy tale endings in a reality that was far more complicated than any children's story. "I want time," I said again. "Time to figure out if we can make this work without destroying each other." "Time," Sebastian agreed, "but not distance. We're in this together now. All 3 of us." As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that somewhere over the past 3 weeks, the decision had already been made. Whether I'd consciously acknowledged it or not, we weren't leaving Sebastian's estate when Sienna recovered. This was our new reality. Protection and luxury in exchange for freedom. Safety for Sienna in exchange for my surrender to a life I'd never chosen. But as I listened to my daughter's peaceful breathing through the connecting door, watched the security lights move across the gardens outside my window, I had to admit that surrender might not be the right word for what was happening. Perhaps it was more like acceptance, of Sebastian's love and his world, of the fact that some choices were made for us by circumstances beyond our control, of the possibility that the life I'd tried so hard to avoid might actually be the life we were meant to live. The next morning brought news that would test that acceptance in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sebastian appeared at breakfast with an expression I'd learned to recognize, controlled tension that meant business had intruded on our carefully maintained domestic bubble. "There's been a development," he said, his voice carefully neutral as Sienna focused on her cereal. "What kind of development?" "The kind we'll discuss after Sienna finishes her physical therapy session this morning." The careful way he avoided specifics while our daughter was present sent anxiety crawling up my spine. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough that Sebastian was activating whatever protocols he had for protecting us from the realities of his world. But as I watched Sienna laugh at something her physical therapist said, watched her move with increasing strength and energy, I realized that I trusted Sebastian to handle whatever crisis had emerged. Somewhere over the past few weeks, without fully realizing it, I'd begun to believe in his ability to keep us safe. The question was whether I was ready to discover what keeping us safe might actually require. The crisis meeting took place in Sebastian's study, a room I'd only glimpsed before, but never entered. Unlike the warm, residential feel of the medical wing, this space was pure business. Dark wood, leather furniture, and wall-mounted monitors that could display information from anywhere in the world. The 3 men waiting with Sebastian when I arrived were clearly part of his inner circle, their postures respectful but alert, in a way that suggested they were accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Samantha, this is Marcus, my head of security," Sebastian said, gesturing to a tall man with graying temples and intelligent eyes. "Victor, who coordinates personal protection, and James, who handles intelligence gathering." The formal introductions made my stomach clench. These weren't household staff or business associates. These were the people who kept Sebastian alive in a world where violence was always a possibility. "What's happened?" I asked, taking the chair Sebastian indicated while the other men remained standing. Marcus stepped forward, consulting a tablet. "3 days ago, someone began making inquiries about you and Sienna. Very specific inquiries. Your daily routines before coming here, Sienna's medical history, details about your living situation and financial status. Who would want that information?" "Several possibilities," Sebastian replied. "Business rivals looking for leverage, former associates with grudges, or..." He paused, his expression darkening. "Someone connected to Sienna's biological father." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never told anyone who he really was." "You didn't have to." James spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Hospital records from Sienna's birth list the father is unknown, but genetic testing for the bone marrow match would have created a trail. Someone with the right resources could have traced it back." Sebastian leaned forward in his chair. "The inquiries aren't random or opportunistic. Someone knows exactly who they're looking for and why it matters." "What kind of danger are we talking about?" "Unknown at this point," Marcus said. "Could be anything from attempted extortion to kidnapping to elimination of what someone sees as a threat." The casual way he mentioned elimination made me feel sick. A threat? How could Sienna possibly be a threat to anyone? "Children are leverage," Sebastian explained, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "They're pressure points that can be used to control their parents. In my world, that makes them valuable to the wrong people." I looked around the room at these men who discussed my daughter's potential kidnapping or murder with the same professional detachment they might bring to discussing weather patterns. "So what do we do?" "We increase security," Victor said. "Full lockdown protocols until we identify the source of the inquiries and neutralize the threat." "Lockdown?" The word sent panic shooting through my chest. "For how long?" "As long as necessary," Sebastian said firmly. "Until this is resolved." "Sebastian, she's 5 years old. She's been cooped up in medical facilities for months. She needs normalcy. She needs to play with other children. She She needs to stay alive. Sebastian cut me off, his voice harder than I'd heard it since we'd been here. Everything else is secondary to that. The finality in his tone sparked a familiar rebellion. You can't just lock us away indefinitely because someone might be a threat. I can, and I will. Sebastian stood, moving to one of the monitors on the wall. With a few touches, it displayed a map of the estate grounds, dotted with red indicators. These are the current security positions. As of this morning, we've tripled the perimeter guard and established a 2-mile secure zone around the property. I stared at the map, seeing our beautiful sanctuary transformed into something that looked more like a military installation. This is insane, Sebastian. You're talking about turning us into prisoners because of some vague threat that might not even be real. The threat is real enough, James interjected, pulling out his own tablet. Yesterday, someone attempted to access Sienna's school records using forged credentials. This morning, your former landlord received a visit from someone claiming to be conducting a background check for a potential employer. These aren't random fishing expeditions. The systematic nature of the inquiries sent ice through my veins. Someone was building a comprehensive profile of our lives, gathering the kind of detailed information that suggested planning rather than casual interest. Show her the rest, Sebastian said quietly. Marcus consulted his notes. 2 hours ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a potential extraction attempt within the next 72 hours. Extraction? I barely recognized my own voice. Kidnapping, Sebastian translated bluntly. Someone intends to take you and Sienna, most likely to use as leverage against me. The room seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't some abstract discussion of theoretical threats. Someone was actively planning to hurt my daughter. Who? Who would do this? We're still investigating, Victor said. But the sophistication of the operation suggests organized crime involvement, either a rival family looking to weaken Sebastian's position or what? Sebastian's expression had gone completely cold, the controlled warmth I'd grown accustomed to replaced by something that reminded me why people feared him. Or someone connected to Sienna's biological father, who sees her existence as a problem that needs to be solved. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think her real father wants to hurt her? I think powerful men with secrets to protect sometimes make drastic decisions to preserve those secrets, Sebastian said carefully. A child born from a casual encounter, especially one whose existence could be used for blackmail or public embarrassment, might be seen as a liability. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the nightmare our lives had become. 6 years ago, I'd fled from Sebastian's dangerous world to protect my daughter. Now it seemed that danger had found us anyway, from a source I'd never even considered. What do you need from me? I asked finally. Complete cooperation with security protocols, Marcus said. No unauthorized departures from the secure areas. No communication with outside parties without clearance. No variations from established routines. And how long will this last? Until we eliminate the threat, Sebastian said. There was something in his voice that made me look at him more closely. A cold resolve that spoke of decisions already made and actions already planned. Sebastian, what are you going to do? Whatever needs to be done to protect my family. The possessive way he said my family would have bothered me under other circumstances. Now, with genuine threats circling us like wolves, it was oddly comforting. Whatever his faults, Sebastian Russo was a man who protected what was his with absolute ruthlessness. I need to tell Sienna something, I said. She's going to notice the increased security, the restrictions. She deserves an explanation. Tell her we're being extra careful because some people might be jealous of our happiness, Sebastian suggested. Children understand jealousy. Frame it as protection rather than imprisonment. After the meeting ended and the security team dispersed to implement whatever measures they'd planned, Sebastian and I sat alone in his study. The weight of the situation pressed down on us, transforming our carefully maintained domesticity into something more urgent and dangerous. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you wanted for her." "It's not your fault," I replied, though part of me wasn't sure that was entirely true. "If anything, it's mine. If I'd stayed with you 6 years ago, if I'd let you know about the pregnancy, she would have been protected from birth. And you would have been miserable, trapped in a life you didn't choose." Sebastian turned to face me fully. "I don't regret that you tried to give her something different. Samantha, I only regret that the world didn't let you succeed." The kindness in his words made my chest tight. "What happens now? Do we just wait here while you wage war against shadows? We keep Sienna safe while I handle the threat, and when it's over." He paused, studying my face. "When it's over, we decide what kind of life we want to build together." Together? The word carried implications I wasn't sure I was ready for. You and I and Sienna. A real family. Not just a temporary arrangement for her medical recovery. The certainty in his voice should have triggered my usual defensive responses. Instead, it filled me with something that felt suspiciously like relief. Over the past month, watching Sebastian with our daughter, seeing the gentleness and devotion he brought to fatherhood, I'd begun to wonder if I'd been wrong about him. Not about the danger of his world. That was proving all too real. But about his capacity for the kind of love that put family before everything else. And if I said yes? If I agreed to make this permanent? Something vulnerable flickered across his features. Then I'd spend the rest of my life making sure you never regretted it. Before I could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the estate. Not loud or panicked, but persistent enough to be unmistakable. Sebastian was on his feet instantly, speaking rapidly into a communication device that appeared from nowhere. "What is it?" I asked, fear making my voice sharp. "Perimeter breach. Someone's attempted to approach the medical wing." His expression was grim as he listened to reports coming through his earpiece. "Multiple vehicles, coordinated approach. This isn't reconnaissance. It's the extraction attempt." My heart stopped. "Sienna is secure. Victor has her in the safe room with a full protection detail." Sebastian was already moving toward a wall panel I'd never noticed, which slid open to reveal an array of weapons. "But we need to move you there as well. I'm not hiding while people threaten my daughter." "You're not hiding. You're staying with her while I eliminate the threat." Sebastian selected a handgun with practiced efficiency, checking its load before holstering it. "Samantha, I need you to trust me. I need you to go to the safe room and stay with Sienna until this is over." The authority in his voice was absolute, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Fear. Sebastian Russo, who commanded an empire and faced down dangerous men without flinching, was afraid for his family. "How many people are out there?" "At least 6 vehicles. Possibly more." He pressed a button on his desk, and the wall monitors lit up with feeds from security cameras around the estate. I could see dark SUVs positioned at various points, men in tactical gear moving with military precision. Professional operation, well-funded and well-planned. "Sebastian." I reached for him, needing the contact, needing to anchor myself to something solid while our world came apart around us. He caught my hand, bringing it to his lips, in a gesture that was both tender and desperate. "I will come back to both of you," he said quietly. "I promise." As Marcus appeared to escort me to wherever Sienna was being kept safe, I looked back at Sebastian standing in his study, surrounded by monitors displaying the battle for our lives that was about to begin. He looked every inch the dangerous man I'd once feared, but also like the father who had spent weeks reading bedtime stories and helping with puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. The safe room was accessed through a hidden passage behind what appeared to be a utility closet. The space itself was larger than I'd expected. clearly designed for extended occupancy if necessary. Sienna was there with 2 female guards who had somehow managed to make the situation seem like an adventure rather than a crisis. "Mommy?" She ran to me, and I swept her into my arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "The ladies said we're playing a special hiding game until Daddy Sebastian makes sure everything is safe." "That's right, sweetheart. Just a game." But as I held my daughter and listened to the muffled sounds of whatever was happening above us, I knew that the game we were playing had the highest possible stakes. Outside, Sebastian was fighting for our lives, for our future, for the right to be a family without constantly looking over our shoulders. For the first time since this all began, I found myself praying. Not just for our safety, but for Sebastian's return. Somewhere over the past month, without fully realizing it, I'd stopped seeing him as the enemy and started seeing him as the man who loved us enough to risk everything to protect us. The waiting seemed endless. I tried to keep Sienna entertained with stories and games, but part of my attention was always focused on the sounds filtering down from the estate above us. Occasionally, I could hear Victor's voice providing updates through the communication system, but the words were too muffled to understand clearly. It was just after midnight when the all-clear finally came. Victor appeared in the safe room doorway, his expression grim, but relieved. "It's over. The threat has been neutralized." "Sebastian?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "Unharmed. He's waiting for you upstairs." I found him in his study, standing at the windows looking out at grounds that showed subtle signs of the battle that had taken place. Scorch marks on the lawn, damaged landscaping where vehicles had been destroyed, the systematic efficiency of a cleanup operation already underway. He turned when he heard us enter, and I saw a cut on his cheek, blood on his shirt, exhaustion around his eyes. But he was alive. He was whole. And when Sienna ran to him with the unthinking trust of a child who had never doubted he would keep his promises, something inside my chest finally settled into place. "Is everyone gone?" I asked, as he lifted Sienna into his arms. "Everyone who posed a threat, yes." His voice was tired, but satisfied. "It's over, Samantha. All of it." "Who were they?" Sebastian's expression grew complicated. "Hired professionals working for someone who wanted to ensure certain secrets stayed buried. Someone who saw Sienna's existence as a threat to his reputation and position." "Her biological father?" "Among others. But they won't be a problem anymore." I didn't ask what that meant in practical terms. I didn't want to know the details of how Sebastian had resolved threats to our family. What mattered was that he had, and that we were safe. "So what happens now?" I asked as Victor took Sienna to get her settled back in her room. Sebastian moved closer, his hands coming up to frame my face with a gentleness that belied the violence he'd just orchestrated on our behalf. "Now we decide what kind of life we want to build together. All 3 of us." Looking into his gray eyes, seeing the love and determination, and absolute commitment there, I realized that the decision had already been made. Not by force or manipulation or circumstance, but by the simple recognition that this man would move heaven and earth to protect the people he loved. "I want this," I said quietly. "I want us. All the complications and dangers and impossible realities that come with loving you. I want all of it." Sebastian's smile was like sunrise breaking over a landscape I'd thought would be forever dark. "Are you sure? Because once you say yes, I'm never letting either of you go again." "I'm sure." And for the first time in 6 years, I truly was. As we stood in the aftermath of the battle he'd fought for our future, I understood that love wasn't always safe or simple or easy. Sometimes it required surrendering to realities you'd never chosen, accepting protection you'd never wanted, trusting someone with everything you held dear. But sometimes, if you were very lucky, it also meant finding your way home to the place you were always meant to be.